I came home earlier than usual from work one afternoon, expecting to spend a little extra time with my family, and was met with a scene so shocking it felt like my world had spun off its axis. My husband's so-called work wife was not only in our home, but appeared to be fully settled there, with her luggage casually tucked by the couch. Even worse, I heard my 6-year-old son call this woman mommy, and it felt as if my heart had been ripped out of my chest. The betrayal I felt in that moment was beyond words, and as if that wasn't enough of a blow, I soon discovered that my husband and this woman had used his family trust fund, the same fund that was meant to safeguard our future, to secretly purchase a separate property that they planned to share. I had been married to my husband for 8 years, and throughout most of those years, I had believed with all my heart that we had a rock-solid relationship. We had our beautiful son, who brought us joy every single day. I've been working as a pediatric nurse at a busy hospital, pulling long shifts on weekends and weeknights when necessary, dedicating my life to helping sick children get better. Meanwhile, my husband is a corporate lawyer working at a very prestigious firm. Between our high-pressure jobs and the demands of parenting, I thought we were just like every other couple, doing our best to balance our work commitments, maintain our marriage, and raise our child in a warm, nurturing home. Little did I know, I was completely off track. About 3 weeks ago, everything turned upside down in the blink of an eye. It was a Saturday, and I was scheduled to be on a tough 12-hour shift at the hospital due to staff shortages. However, something very rare happened. I was let off early, which felt like an unexpected gift. I decided not to inform my husband that I'd be coming home ahead of schedule, thinking it would be a pleasant surprise for both him and our son. My boy had been mentioning recently that he missed me because I worked so often, and I was thrilled at the idea of grabbing these extra hours to spend time with him. I had visions of reading him an afternoon story, or maybe just cuddling on the couch and watching cartoons. I pulled up to our driveway around 2 p.m. and noticed a strange car parked nearby. At first, I shrugged it off, assuming one of my husband's work colleagues might be over to collaborate on a project. Even though it was the weekend, he often brought work home, and I believed this was just another day of him being dedicated to his career. But as I walked up to the front door, I heard a woman laughing, a light, carefree laugh that was entwined with my son's giggles. My stomach tightened with a nervous dread, yet I tried to reassure myself that maybe this was just a friendly co-worker entertaining him for a moment. When I opened the door, the scene before me was impossible to make sense of. This woman, who looked to be in her early 30s, was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by my son's brightly colored toys. She even had on my apron, as though she had been cooking up something in my kitchen. My husband was on the sofa, reclining comfortably, as if this were the most normal weekend in the world for them. My brain was screaming that this was all wrong. My son broke away from her and ran over to me, and I expected the usual excited cry of mommy. But instead, he exclaimed something that felt like an uppercut straight to my stomach. "Look, real mommy is showing me how to build a robot." He was pointing at this stranger. He was calling her real mommy, as though I was some kind of imposter. My husband jumped to his feet, clearly unsettled by my unexpected arrival. He stuttered through an explanation, calling this woman Sarah, his work wife, and tried to rationalize that she was temporarily living with us, because her apartment had water damage and the insurance was taking forever to fix it. I could hardly focus on what he was saying because my eyes were glued to the suitcases partly hidden behind the couch. They weren't simply packed for a brief stay, they appeared to be fully unloaded, with clothing spilling out everywhere, Sarah's clothes. It was too obvious. She was living in my house, in my space, acting like a second mother to my son. My mind felt clouded. I don't even recall everything I said in the heat of that moment, but I remember stomping up the stairs in a daze, grabbing my luggage, and throwing my own clothes into it. My husband trailed after me, throwing out excuses and insisting I was overreacting. But in that instant, everything I thought I knew about my marriage shattered like fragile glass hitting the floor. I'd already discovered something suspicious 2 weeks prior, although I hadn't confronted him yet. While looking through his home office for tax documents, I'd come upon a hidden folder that raised every alarm in my body. Inside it were bank statements, showing steady transfers to a mysterious account I knew nothing about. These transactions dated back nearly a year, and there were official documents discussing a property purchase I had never heard of. Worst of all were the emails, cold, written evidence, exchanged between my husband and Sarah. They were talking about grand future plans, conspiratorial ideas that left no doubt in my mind they were far more than just friends or colleagues. I took photos of every document, intending to confront him soon. But never did I imagine I would walk in on this woman comfortably settled into my home like she was part of the family, and my son hanging on to her every word. I wasted no time. I packed up not just my own belongings, but also what I needed for my son. My husband kept hovering, pleading, telling me I was misinterpreting the situation. He argued that this was a misunderstanding and that everything would be resolved if I would just calm down. None of his words resonated with me. My only thought was that I could not remain in this house where my husband had deceived me so completely. My son, with tears rolling down his cheeks, was utterly confused. He wanted to stay with real mommy, and each time he used that phrase, I felt a stabbing pain in my chest. How had it come to this? How had my husband let someone else step into my role so effectively that my own child was confused about who his real mother was? At first, I drove around aimlessly, unsure where to go. I had initially considered a hotel, somewhere anonymous and safe, but something steered me toward my mother-in-law's home. She and I had maintained a friendly relationship over the years, and I knew she had gone through a heartbreakingly similar experience with my father-in-law a long time ago. I pulled into her driveway and nearly collapsed as soon as she opened the door. I began explaining through sobs, and then I showed her the documents from her son's office. Bank statements, property deeds, suspicious email exchanges, each piece of paper told a story of betrayal. Her face transformed from bewilderment to fury as she understood exactly what her son had done. Then she dropped a bombshell I hadn't expected. My husband's trust fund money had been used to buy the new house with Sarah. This wasn't just any account. It was specifically set aside to support our family. There were explicit stipulations stating how it could or couldn't be used, and buying a home with his mistress definitely didn't meet those guidelines. I felt the weight of betrayal triple in that moment. It wasn't just an affair, and it wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was financial deceit, too. Money that was supposed to ensure our child's future had been funneled into a fantasy life with another woman. My mother-in-law's anger matched my own, and her eyes spoke volumes. She recognized the echoes of her own past betrayal in what I was going through now, and she was determined to help. For the next few days, I was in a fog. I found a hotel to stay in, paying with cash so my husband couldn't trace me. Then I contacted an experienced divorce attorney recommended by a colleague at the hospital. She was known for her expertise in delicate cases just like mine. I applied for emergency custody of our son, meticulously documenting every piece of evidence I had: the bank statements, the photos of the secret property purchase, Sarah's presence in my home, and the fact that my son had been coached to call her mommy. I laid out how they had coordinated behind my back for nearly a year. As soon as people in our circle caught wind that I had left my husband, his friends and acquaintances began bombarding my phone with texts and voicemail messages, accusing me of being cruel and excessive. They told me it was just a single mistake, and a momentary lapse in judgment. They questioned whether I had the right to separate my son from his father. No one seemed to grasp how profoundly my husband had betrayed my trust. They couldn't conceive of the pain that hits you when you step into your own living room and find a strange woman playing house with your own child as if you never existed. I tried not to let their words get under my skin, but it was difficult not to feel attacked. Still, I was resolute that what I was doing was for my son's protection, shielding him from an environment where he was being manipulated. I had no choice but to face the swirl of doubt that occasionally crept in, asking me if I was overreacting, if I was being unfair to keep my husband away from his own child. But at the end of the day, I knew I couldn't allow him to continue fostering a relationship under false pretenses, one that undermined who I was to my son. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if I should have heard him out, let him speak his side of the story in full. I asked myself if it was possible for me to simply bury the hurt and pretend everything was fine for my son's sake. But how could I forgive someone who not only cheated, but also brought his affair partner into our home to play mother to our child? Trust is fragile, and once shattered, it's nearly impossible to restore. The foundation of our marriage was dust in my hands. An update came swiftly. My mother-in-law wasted no time taking those trust fund documents to the proper administrators. Because the money in that trust was never meant for personal indulgences or romantic escapades, the administrators immediately froze the account pending a thorough investigation. My husband's law firm had to be notified as well, which sent ripples of chaos through his professional life. Since he and Sarah had been romantically involved without disclosing it to the firm, a direct breach of company policy, the firm was forced to launch its own internal investigation. My husband's once impressive career was now dangling by a thread, caught between potential financial impropriety and a scandalous affair with a co-worker. My attorney worked quickly, filing the emergency custody paperwork so efficiently that we were given a temporary ruling granting me primary custody of our son. The judge was alarmed when they saw evidence showing my husband and Sarah had persuaded my son to call her real mommy. This looked very much like parental alienation, especially damaging to a child as young as ours. The courts took this very seriously, and that went heavily in my favor. During this time, my husband bombarded me with messages. They swung wildly from fury, accusing me of blowing things out of proportion, to tearful pleas for me to come back so we could fix everything. He claimed Sarah was just a friend helping him with a real estate venture, rationalizing that the property purchase was merely a business opportunity. But I had all the proof in hand. Their emails and bank statements weren't about random investments. They were blatantly planning a future that did not include me. Oddly, through all the frantic calls and texts, he never once asked specifically about our son's well-being, never mentioned missing bedtime stories, or wanting to tuck him in at night. His distress seemed far more focused on his own losses and how unfair I was being to him. It hurt to realize just how removed he seemed from the needs and feelings of our child. For years, I had convinced myself he was always putting our family first. But the deeper I dug, the more I uncovered signs that he had been building a new life without me, tying our son into that life in a way that was deeply harmful. Meanwhile, the trust fund investigation revealed even more unsettling details. Apparently, buying that one house was just a single thread in a web of clandestine investments and hush-hush deals he'd set up with Sarah. He had fully broken the conditions of the trust, risking serious legal consequences. My mother-in-law was livid, not just at the money lost, but at her son's blatant lies. It brought back painful memories of the betrayal she suffered from my father-in-law. She saw her own past repeating itself in the next generation. Things were crashing down at the law firm too. My husband was placed on indefinite leave while they probed deeper into the misconduct. I was quietly relieved, knowing that every piece of evidence they found would only bolster my case in court. In spite of all this, I'd get the occasional pang of conscience. Was I really doing the right thing by limiting my husband's contact with our son to supervised visits? Every so often, watching them together during those visits made me ache for the family I believed we had. Yet, each time I remembered all the deceit and how he had tried to replace me as a mother, my resolve hardened. I reminded myself that I had an obligation to protect our child from any further harm. The social pressure was enormous. Mutual acquaintances whispered that I was intentionally tearing the family apart. I was supposedly manipulating my mother-in-law to stand against her own son, preventing any chance of reconciliation. But I wanted to shout that none of them had seen what I saw, that none of them had experienced walking into their own home only to discover they'd been unknowingly replaced. I refused to be guilt-tripped. This wasn't my fault. My husband had made a series of choices that led us here. The next update came in the form of a bigger shakeup at my husband's firm. Their internal review discovered countless examples of questionable behavior between him and Sarah at office gatherings and off-site events. They evidently had not been discreet, and numerous colleagues had stories of how the pair was too close for comfort. Even more damning were allegations that Sarah had received favoritism on several key cases that elevated her status and positioned her for a partnership. This kind of blatant breach of ethics couldn't be swept under the rug. Both my husband and Sarah found themselves on administrative leave. The firm, fearing any potential liability, began cooperating with my attorney, making records available that could help my case immensely. Things looked grim for my husband, jeopardizing both his job and his reputation. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law stepped up in ways I never imagined. She had experienced a similar heartbreak, and she understood the toll this betrayal could take on a marriage and a child. She was relentless in her support of me and her grandson, offering her home as a refuge, and even pulling strings to ensure that we had everything we needed to feel safe. She helped me coordinate therapy for my son, who was exhibiting worrying signs of confusion and distress. The child psychologist specialized in parental alienation, and told me that my husband and Sarah had clearly been influencing my son's perception of me while I was working. It was devastating to learn how methodically they had been turning him away from me. But I was determined to reverse that damage. The trust fund inquiry escalated when investigators uncovered more illicit financial dealings. My husband had diverted funds not just once, but multiple times to unauthorized investments he had launched with Sarah. It looked more and more like an intricate scheme that had been ongoing for a long while. This was catastrophic for him, because now the trustees were looking to permanently revoke his control over the trust, leaving him in dire financial straits. In the blink of an eye, he was at serious risk of losing his standing in both his professional and personal life. It baffled me to think of how much he had hidden from me over the years. Our marriage had been built on illusions, it seemed. My attorney kept me updated with every fresh piece of evidence. His repeated attempts to contact me turned more desperate each day. He tried blaming me, saying I'd neglected him by working too many nights at the hospital. He claimed he felt lonely and unappreciated. But I wasn't buying it. There were 100 ways he could have addressed marital issues without resorting to an affair and secret financial deals. Sarah had seemingly vanished from our house as quickly as she'd arrived. Rumor was, her apartment never had any water damage to begin with, and she'd lied to create a reason to move into our home. Now, she was quietly trying to evade any accountability, yet she faced her own troubles at the firm and possibly beyond. I couldn't help but observe how people can surprise you in unexpected ways. My mother-in-law, for instance, had become one of my closest allies. We were bonded by understanding and the drive to protect my son from chaos. On the other hand, some of my husband's friends saw me as the villain of the piece, accusing me of depriving him of paternal rights, and turning his own mother against him. They had no idea about the mountain of evidence showcasing his years of deceit. My ultimate goal has been to keep life as normal as possible for my son. I've tried to keep routine, ensure he goes to his usual activities, and maintain a semblance of stability despite our stormy circumstances. I want him to trust that I will always be here, that I won't disappear the way his father did emotionally. He's in therapy to sort through the tangle of emotions, and slowly, he's relearning that I am his mother, the one who loves him unconditionally. It's going to be a lengthy process, but each baby step forward is a victory. Another major development happened. The investigation at my husband's law firm wrapped up, and both he and Sarah were terminated. As it turned out, they had been misusing company resources, even going so far as to reveal confidential client details to further their private investments. This was serious enough to raise the scrutiny of the State Bar Association, meaning their licenses to practice law could be on the line. Some of their former clients, whose sensitive information was compromised, were preparing formal complaints that could result in severe legal consequences. Losing his law license would be devastating for my husband's career, but the truth is, he brought it on himself. The trust fund situation has now been settled, with my husband's access permanently revoked. Whatever remains in the trust will be preserved for our son's future, and my husband won't have any influence over those funds. In the span of a few chaotic weeks, he lost his job, his financial cushion, and the respect of his peers. As distressing as all of this is, I can't say I'm surprised. It was an inevitable outcome of his months, or possibly years, of secret scheming. I heard that Sarah vacated the house, too, returning to her so-called apartment. Apparently, that entire story about water damage was just another fabrication they used to legitimize her moving in with my husband. My son, thank goodness, has been making some slow progress in therapy. He's slowly reconciling the confusion about who his real mother is. Although he's still afraid at times, he suffers from nightmares and occasionally clings to me like he's terrified I'll vanish. I'm hopeful that we can mend his sense of security. The divorce process has been moving rapidly, and my attorney is pushing hard to ensure I retain primary custody. Between the evidence of parental alienation and my husband's fraudulent financial maneuvers, we have a strong case. The property settlement is trickier, but I trust my lawyer to ensure my son's needs are protected. My mother-in-law is even helping me explore new housing options in a better neighborhood, wanting me to have a fresh start, where I won't be haunted by memories of betrayal. Looking back, it's mind-boggling how a single act of me heading home early managed to peel back so many layers of deception. It's infuriating, overwhelming, and heartbreaking all at once, but it has also shown me what I'm capable of. I was always the type of person to believe the best in people, to trust my husband's word without hesitation. Now, I'm more cautious. I will never dismiss my instincts again. I want my son to see that it is okay for people to demand the respect they deserve and to walk away from toxic situations without shame. During this entire ordeal, my husband had the nerve to send me a final message blaming me for ruining his life. But he needs to understand that I didn't do this to him, he did it to himself. He made deliberate, hurtful choices that spiraled out of control. I was merely the person who happened to uncover it and refused to remain silent. He can resent me all he wants, but deep down he must realize he orchestrated his own downfall. Some of his friends continue to beg me to reconcile, to think of our son. They imply I'm cruel for not forgiving him. They believe I'm punishing my husband at my child's expense, but they don't fully grasp the gravity of everything he's done. This isn't a simple mistake, it's a systematic betrayal that involved our child in the worst possible way. By the time I'd learned the truth, there was no going back. Despite the chaos, I'm determined to plan for a brighter, healthier future for my son and me. I want him to grow up in an environment where loyalty, honesty, and emotional security matter above all else. I can't erase the past, but I can decide how we move forward, and that is to keep him away from manipulative influences, and show him the true meaning of unconditional love. I'm ready for a fresh start, free from my husband's lies and infidelity. It won't be simple, but I owe it to my son to give him the best life possible. And that's precisely what I intend to do.